Hello and welcome back to the Writer's Corner. I'm your host, Micaela, and this week I'll be walking you through creating a story. So let's get started. Now, it's very hard for a lot of people to come up with a plot, myself included, and I've just come up with a few ways to find inspiration for your stories. These include Pinterest, prompts, life in general, nature, music, books, and television. These are all very helpful. You can look at these in many different ways. You could be listening to music and pick up a story idea from the lyrics. You could be watching TV and think, wow, that character is really cool, and kind of stem a story from that character's point of view. And a lot of us scroll through Pinterest. I am on it all the time, and you can find pictures or even prompts on there as well. But I've found pictures on there that have sparked a story idea in my head, and just life in general and nature. You can see things and wonder, like, how would that become a story? How would this, how, if these two things met in nature, what kind of story would that spark? So all kind of things can inspire your stories. And to start with plot, I have a prompt here that I actually found on Pinterest that we're just going to use as the idea for all of these things we're going to talk about today. So this general plot is that salt is known to repel evil things, which we've heard in many TV shows. And um a bunch of companies start to drain the sea of salt, and this sets free a monster that the Dead Sea was meant to contain. So that's the general prompt idea. And that would be your plot, that these companies have set free a monster and now the world doesn't know what to do. That's your general thing with the plot. Now, you could leave it like this. I mean, it's not that big of a, it's kind of vague, but you could leave it like this and just start going on to the other parts of the story. Or you could delve deeper into the plot and think, how do you want to start this story? So maybe you start with the origin of the Dead Sea, origin of the companies, like how they got there, how they started to do that, how they started to take the salt from the sea, um, why you could look into why the salt was keeping the monster at bay. So obviously salt's known to repel evil things, but you could, if it's such this big monster that the Dead Sea has been containing it for years, you want to ask yourself, what exactly in the salt, why did it keep the monster at bay? You just want to start answering questions to kind of like fix um, plot holes before they happen in your story. Because if you're halfway through your story and then you realize that it's all full of plot holes, that's going to be a really big issue, and you might even have to scrap everything and rewrite it, which I've done a couple times. So it's best to just, even if you don't want to continue with your idea, if you're planning on writing something, just ask yourself these kind of questions, like what's happening with the origin of the sea, what's happening with the companies, why is the salt keeping monster at bay? Because these are questions that your reader will ask themselves when they're reading your story, if they ever read your story, and you don't want to have people questioning that and they never get an answer. And with that, we're on to characters. To think, who do I need in this story to help it progress? Now, with the plot that we already have, we can ask ourselves, who would be the one that is helping the Dead Sea? Who's the one that's trying to solve this problem of this monster being released on the world? And that's probably a hero, because not a lot of people would decide they're gonna go out and save the world from a sea monster. So you have to think, what kind of traits does this character exhibit? And probably bravery, um, selfless, kind, and this also, you don't have to stick with cliches for your character, because it makes it a lot more interesting when you have a character who you wouldn't expect to see in that sort of situation. So you could also have a different sort of character set as the main character in this plot. And maybe it's someone who's just dragged into this situation, someone who doesn't really want to be there. Maybe they were at the sea at the time that the monster escaped, and they were dragged into the sea with the monster. Or maybe the monster immediately looked at them, and now they're forced to fight it. And maybe they keep the monster at bay for a short period of time because their life is at stake. And then the people who are trying to keep this monster at bay, maybe there's a whole group of them, want this person to join them, but this person has no desire to be in that. And that would be a very, non cliche character to have in this type of story, because you wouldn't think that a person who's very nervous and like full of anxiety would want to fight a sea monster. So if you had that idea, you want to come up with a name, and names are really important things for a character. You want to make sure that you have the perfect name, because in this sort of story, just using it as an example, you wouldn't want to have a character with the name of like Athena or Asmodeus. Something crazy like that for a story like this doesn't really fit well. And so you'd want a name like Ethan or Abby, something normal like that, but it doesn't have to be, you know, so normal that it seems like it's not that fitting either. There's a happy medium that you have to find. You can go on baby sites, all these other things, and find the kind of name that suits your character best. So you would need to figure out which character would suit which name would suit your character best, and figure out what kind of person is this character, their personality traits. And you can take one of these personality traits, like bravery or like being quiet, being nervous, and you can search that into Google and find a bunch of names that fit that stereotype or fit that personality, and look through those names and try and figure out which one would suit your character best. Writing characters is very hard, and unfortunately I don't have much advice on it. I just know that it's very easy to come up with a character directly from your plot, but if you don't have a plot, then sometimes the plot can come from your character as well. So if you have the idea of a character at first, then you can think, what situation would this character be in? And that can also help you come up with plot as well. Because if you think, oh, I have an assassin character, well, what kind of story is surrounding that assassin? Maybe they um, did a job for someone and now that person's after them. You can always, all these things are interconnected in a story, and it doesn't always have to go in a certain order. Most people will probably like to start with plot, go to characters, as I'm doing right now, but you don't have to do that. Sometimes everything can come from anything, any part of a story. So don't worry about being in a specific order, and don't worry about everything being perfect, because even if you write your entire story based off this character and then you don't like it, you can always rewrite it. So now with that, let's get on to the goal. Asking yourself what I mean by this. Now, with all stories, there's usually some sort of lesson you're trying to get across to your reader, or some sort of meaning to the story. Because without meaning or a lesson, your story doesn't really hold up. So, with this example in mind, maybe your goal is to teach people um, just this really basic thing. Maybe don't don't harm the environment. Maybe that's your basic goal with this story, is to teach people you probably don't want to harm the environment, because there might be something very deep in the sea that's lingering there. But you could also think, with the idea of this main character who doesn't really want to be in the situation, like bravery comes in other forms. um, don't let fear hold you back. It doesn't always have to be a really big lesson or anything like that. It can just be something small or to the moderate range, but you always need something like that the reader is going to take away from your story. What is the reader going to think when they close your book and start looking back on the story as a whole? Are they going to think, oh wow, that was like a lot of events happening, but I don't really know what the story meant? Or are they going to think, wow, these events led to this one overall meaning or lesson, and I can see how all those things are connected? So that's not the easiest thing to do. And sometimes I write a story and I don't really have a meaning at the end of it, but it'll usually find you'll usually find it on your own. It's not really something you can plan for, at least in my experience. You just have to write your story and let it happen. And if you don't like doing that, then I would just suggest looking at your plot and thinking, what do you want people to get from this story? And then doing it that way. And with that, let's get on to conflict. Necessity in every story. It drives your story forward and it keeps readers engaged and excited. But your conflict doesn't always have to be big to make the story interesting. Now, a big conflict would be anything from a death of a character or um, the world exploding, something like that, something really big that puts a lot of weight on your characters. Now, at times, a big conflict is necessary for the story, but you don't have to put in a big conflict if you don't feel like it'll help drive your story forward. A lot of people tend to kill off characters for seemingly no reason because they want to add conflict to their story, and this isn't necessary. There is an easy way to add conflict to your story, and it can just be in small moments that aren't really that um, exciting, but they add conflict to your story and keep the reader engaged. They can be as simple as gum in your hair. It's an annoying thing, and it can add to comedy in a story because from that, your character could get angry and the rest of their day could have like minor inconveniences like this, and it could lead to something else or something good because you've had so much conflict. And this keeps your reader this could keep your reader laughing or just engaged in general. But another small conflict, although this isn't a small conflict in real life, but in comparison to the killing off a character, this is small. Breaking off a relationship, that is a small conflict in comparison to a death of a character, but it still makes the story engaging and exciting. And it's just, I just wanted to let you all know that you don't have to have a big conflict to make your story interesting, because I see a lot of stories that I personally read, and I've done it myself, where I and others create a big conflict, and it's not necessary. Your story can be just as engaging if you have small conflicts like the one I just listed. And with that, let's get on to the final extra tip I'd love to give you. Is that planning each chapter of your story is a really helpful thing. Personally, I've done it many times. I've started to do it more because I've realized that going with the flow doesn't really work for me as much. But it doesn't have to be some big, elaborate, detailed plan. It can be as simple as thinking what happened at the end of the last chapter and what needs to happen this chapter. So if we had a chapter based on this example, like the origin story, and then we're thinking, where does that story need to go from there? Where does the story need to go from there? What's the next chapter about? Maybe we introduce the hero. And then you're just saying the hero is like this, and the sea monster looks like this, and the organization is like this, and just little details like that. It doesn't have to be super well thought out. It can just give a basis for your next chapter, and that can help you out more when you're actually writing it. I have done plans like this for my chapters and come up with an ending for the chapter and then completely steered off course. It just helps me decide what needs to happen in that chapter, like basis. But I can go off of it, I can verge off of it, and I can come up with another idea that stems from that. But it does help a lot, and I just wanted to leave you guys with that little tip. That's all for this week. Tune in next time to see me put all this good work to use when I take you through the journey of writing in Story Writing Week 2.